Hi, I'm Brian Crombie, and we're going to be talking on The Brian Crombie Show. We're going to be talking about politics, arts, business, and social issues on The Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. We've got a really interesting psychologist to introduce you to tonight. Rebecca Rosenblat is her name. And she wants to talk tonight about attachment, attachment theory. It's been one of the sort of the hot topics of late where everyone says, that's an attachment problem or something like that. So I want to understand what it's all about. So Rebecca Rosenblat, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very excited to be here, Brian.
Thank you for being here. So, why is this sort of attachment such a hot topic? Why is it important? Why is it something we need to understand?
Humans are the only species where we can't survive on our own. An infant cannot survive on their own. They're very reliant on their caregivers. And they have the longest period of dependency, which gives us a chance to bond with each other emotionally. It's intended to do that. In fact, without the emotional bonding, we can die. After the World War, there were tens of thousands of kids in orphanages. They were well fed, taken care of, good medicine, kept clean and everything, but 85% of them died because they didn't have the manpower to hold them and interact with them. And that interaction, that emotional interaction, is primal for us. So attachment, therefore, is something that is really, really primary to our existence, to how we behave, to how we do life.
So why is it a bad thing? I hear that attachment is a bad thing and people get attached to bad people or make bad choices and stuff like this. So why is attachment theory a bad thing?
Attachment is actually a good thing, but like anything else, you have to do it in a healthy way. That's why I think it's so important to talk about it, what's healthy, what's unhealthy, because we learn from our parents. Like, we're blank slates when we're born. We know nothing about the world around us. So we basically are learning everything. We're like that, the short circuit robot, the 20th version of Pinocchio, was saying more input. We're downloading information with respect to what's best for survival.
Okay.
So either the world is safe or unsafe. People are trustworthy or not. They're reliable or they're unreliable. We're learning this from our parents. And the sad thing is, if it's a dysfunctional family, we don't know what we don't know. So we think that's the lay of the land. And we go through life doing relationships in that way, which is kind of tragic, because if we learn dysfunctionality, then we are bound to replicate it. We have what's called repetition compulsion.
So you're saying if people make bad decisions, it's probably because their parents made bad decisions?
Possibly, but I don't want to blame the parents, because they probably learned from their parents.
Okay.
Or they were influenced by, culture or other things around them.
Are there different types of attachment styles then?
Yes, there's three primary ones. First one is secure. So if your parents are around, they're cheering for you, rooting for you, they're always there, they're consistent, that's a secure person.
Okay.
So they go through life feeling very secure in their relationships. They're not afraid of emotions and they're not preoccupied by them. If there's, the second one's called anxious. If there's intraparental inconsistency, so what that looks like is mom says, wait till dad gets home. So she's your best friend, dad is a ziplinear. Or 1 minute, mom is your best friend, next minute she's really punitive. That child doesn't quite know their place in the world. It's very confusing. So they end up becoming people pleasers. They're always trying to please people to avoid rejection because they don't know how to be. And they're very insecure in their relationships. They're preoccupied by emotions. The third one is what's known as avoidant. So this is a child who learns early on that you can't rely on anyone but yourself. So they could have come from a family with this emotional neglect, or they're cold, they're rigid, they're busy, what have you. So this child learns to rely on themselves. They're successful, they're independent, but they need to be in control, and they're petrified of needing anyone. So they push people away. They're quite uncomfortable, and they need their alone time. They need to be in control. So if you have an avoidant and an anxious person in a relationship, it's disaster.
Yeah.
Yet they're like a magnet. They're so drawn to each other. So the anxious person wants reassurance, and the avoidant person wants distance. So it's very uncomfortable in myriad ways. So it ends up being a very difficult combination, and yet they are drawn to each other like a magnet.
So when we talked last time, we talked a little bit about narcissism and narcissists. And I've heard a lot of people say lately, one person is a narcissist and the other person is a people pleaser, and people pleaser are looking for a narcissist, and narcissists are looking for a people pleaser, or something like that. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does, because the narcissist needs to, for them, the optics are always bigger than feelings, so they always need to be larger in life. Deep down inside, they're quite insecure, but they need to show the world they're big and convince themselves of that as well.
Right.
The people pleaser is often ends up in a codependent role, where they can sit there, they
What do
can
you mean
fawn.
a codependent role?
So they're basically trying to live for the other party, and when
They're trying to live
for the other party.
Really?
Yeah, they're trying to please them. They're trying to do things their ways. So the narcissist just loves it, and it gives the codependents something to look forward to. Yeah, and feel good about themselves. But they're not always happy because they're doing all the giving. So people say, what if I'm just a good person that likes to give? The difference is, if you're a good person likes to give, you feel good about doing it. But a codependent person does it to avoid the negative feeling. I don't want to feel guilty. I don't want to feel bad. So I might as well do it even though I don't feel like it. But it's interesting you mentioned the narcissist, because a lot of time avoidance and narcissists are confused because they both create a bit of a distance. But whereas the avoidant creates the distance, pushes you away for self-protection, the narcissist pushes you away for expansion. So they need more space. They need to take up more space. You need to be in the background. You can be an extension of them, but you can't be in the spotlight. So one is trying to protect themselves and pushing you away, and the other is just pushes you away to create space. But it doesn't mean they are mutually exclusive. Quite often, you can see both traits. And then to complicate things, there's a fourth attachment type, and this is ambivalent. It's a hybrid between 2 and 3. So this is the person who does relationships with one foot on the brake, one foot on the accelerator. Yeah. So they're like, I really want to get close to you, but I'm terrified that you're going to hurt me. So they're kind of stuck. And the final one is disorganized. And this is a person whose parents, generally the mom being the primary caregiver, was quite traumatized herself and didn't know how to raise kids.
Right.
So she can be cruel and call it tough love. Or she can make you become dependent on her and then push you away and pretend like she doesn't even know you. These people are really confused, and they become obsessed with not knowing what to do. So I have people that'll say, okay, so are you sure this person wants to go on a date with me? Yes, they said yes. Okay, I'm just going to check with them. They'll check again and again and again. By the time the date rolls around, the other person says, you know what, I've changed my mind here. Because they're just so uncomfortable. They don't know their place in the world. So those 3 are the primary ones, and then there's a hybrid, and some people do refer to disorganized as well, because we see more and more of it as we see more and more trauma in the world.
Fascinating. If people want to, check you out, read some of your stuff, do you have a website?
Yeah, talkwithrebecca.com. Very straightforward.
Talkwithrebecca.com.
And there's a lot of free downloads on everything from attachment to couples issues, how to show up as your best self, just about anything, overcoming infidelity, why we get drawn to people that are no good for us. All of that good stuff is there.
Rebecca Rosenblat. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Rebecca Rosenblat. We're going to see if there's any solution to these problems that Rebecca's identified. Thanks so much for telling us about attachment theory. Come back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. I'm really having a fun time chatting with Rebecca Rosenblat, who is a psychologist. She's a sex therapist. She's a couples therapist. She does it all. And we've had a couple of conversations previously. We had a really interesting one on the different ways that men and women talk to one another, how they communicate differently. And she gave us the 10 different reasons, 10 different ways that men talk and communicate differently than females. I've actually quoted you a huge number of times at different cocktail parties since then on there, I got to tell you. And then we also talked about sex addiction, which was really kind of interesting. But tonight we're talking about attachment. And Rebecca, you went through a couple of different sort of typologies, I guess you call it, or
attachment styles.
Attachment styles. And it's kind of interesting. And so I got to ask you, like, you describe these different attachment styles, why do people make bad choices? Why are they drawn to people that are bad for them then?
Well, there's a neurobiological component to it. So this is chemistry because it's based in chemicals. So if you make me feel bad or you hurt my feelings, guess what my brain's doing? It's releasing opiates to heal the pain, which feels like cocaine and heroin. So I'm getting high on it. And
You're getting high on feeling bad?
No, if I feel bad, my brain is going to release opiates and they'll get me high because they want to get rid of the pain. So this feels like cocaine or heroin because it's trying to get rid of the pain. It's a painkiller, even though it's emotional pain. So that gives you a bit of a high. Then you have adrenaline to actually make it through the situation or the crisis. After a while, I'll get dependent upon that if you have a really turbulent relationship. And then over time, I need more and more to get that same fix.
So you want the bad stuff because then you get to have the body respond with the good stuff.
Exactly.
Really?
So when there's hurt, you respond by getting these, your self-generated opiates. You're making your own drug. And then after a while, you need more and more for a fix. And let's say, just like with any other addiction, there's a tolerance. You need a greater and greater fix. Or let's say, now you get tired of me and you withdraw. I'm literally going to go into physical withdrawal. I'm going to go crazy.
You're going to need it again.
I'm going to need that fix so desperately. I'm going to be obsessed with getting that fix.
So is that why all girls like the bad guy?
That's another story altogether. But when I want that fix, now let's say either I will approach you or you will approach me. All of a sudden, I'll get this dopamine rush. World feels great. You're back, and I'm going to be producing these drugs again. Obviously, this is all going on at subconscious level.
Yeah.
But then I will start to associate being happy with you. Because when you weren't there, I was miserable, I was in withdrawal, there were no drugs coursing through my veins. Now that I'm with you, the drugs are back, as is dopamine. So now I'm going to associate in a Pavlovian manner being happy with being with you. That means I'm hooked to you at this point. And in that moment,
so
nobody else
you're
will do.
addicted to the bad
You're
relationship.
Hooked, yes, and no one else will do because that's dull, it's boring, there's nothing going on. So you'll say, but I love this person and there's no passion over here. So we make excuses to sell ourselves on that. And it's quite interesting the way we do it. And then you can develop a trauma bond where you're making excuses
What's
for
a trauma bond?
Trauma bond is a bond between someone who abuses someone and the person who's being abused. It can be emotional, psychological, sexual, physical, because the person who's being abused, they have sympathy for this person. So they haven't been loved enough. That's why they're treating me the way, if only I love them enough. So this is why bad boys are so attractive, because you can form a trauma bond. And there's Stockholm.
A trauma bond.
Yeah. And then there's Stockholm syndrome, which is a form of a trauma bond. And if there's PTSD going on, which often happens with trauma, we have this startle response. As soon as you startle, you go into this hypnotic trance and you just do whatever you kind of need to do. There's an interesting concept in an extreme case. It's called Lata syndrome. It's in Indonesia and Malaysia. And they basically program Latas, which are generally females, so that they program their startle response. So when they are startled, they'll do exactly what you ask them to do or what's expected of them. So there was this lady who was a Lata, and she put a hammer through someone's hand because that's what she was programmed to do. And she came before a judge, and judge said, I'm not buying this. And somehow this wouldn't happen in North America. There was a hammer and a nail next to her. He startles her, and boom, she does it to herself. Of course, she got off the hook, but trial by fire. I mean, I'm glad it doesn't happen here, and I hope it never happens anywhere. But that's a trauma bond where you just sort of, when you're stressed out and you're in PTSD, you're very vulnerable, you're very suggestive, and you'll do whatever you've been programmed to do.
So someone that's got this trauma bond, what is the type of person they're attracted to? The bad boy, you say. So is this the narcissist or what?
It can be the narcissist. It can be the bad boy. There's a series on Netflix called Sex Life, and the premise is the woman is married to this guy who's a wonderful man. He gives her everything that she could want, great house, great kids, everything. He'll never cheat on her, good looking, got the whole 9 yards working. But she's obsessed with the previous lover, who's the naughty boy. And I can't tell you how many clients have come in and said, oh my God, they got it. Like, I'm married to this wonderful person. It sounds terrible, but I'm bored.
That's what all us wonderful guys, fear.
Well, I'm sure there's room for wonderful guys, provided you're doing healthy and you're doing attachment in a healthy way.
Oh God, this sounds. So what do you do with a situation like that with someone that's addicted to the bad guy?
Well,
That's
you
no
need
good.
to,
That's
when you're feeling hurt, instead of just lunging for that drug fix, what you need to do is need to look internally and say, what is this all about? Because usually that hurt, something else happened in your past that piggybacks onto it. So when people say to me that, when it's good, it's really good. When it's bad, it's really bad. So I know this is possibly a trauma bond. And when we overreact or even underreact, when a reaction is disproportionate and we know it, that means something from our past has piggybacked onto it and added weight to it. So if we can be cognizant of, I'm upset, really I'm upset because I feel like that kid who felt helpless because dad never talked to her, never asked her what to do, he just made decisions for her.
Yep.
And just now my partner has done that to me, then I can know that that's something that I need to heal internally. And you can either do it if you're in a relationship with a healthy individual, they can help you work through that, or in your relationship with a therapist, you can do that as well.
Right.
They create safety and they give you the tools to heal the inner child and love that inner child, so you don't need to be caught up in those pathological cycles.
you sent me something called the attachment paradox. What's that?
That was the cycle I was talking about. It was, you experience pain, body releases opiates,
Okay.
you get hooked on the person, and round and round and round you go. So it's a typical addiction cycle.
Okay, so what can we do to help ourselves?
So if it's yourself, just look within. When you're hurting or you're upset, look within to see what's going on inside me. So you're looking at your internal environment and feelings as opposed to your external environment or the behavior of the person who's hurting you. Because then you're just kind of giving your power away, and that's where blame and victimhood lives. Doesn't help anybody.
Yep.
But just within yourself, look within your internal environment and your feelings. Try to figure out what it's about. Go to a therapist if need be. And once you figure it out, you heal it, you will not be susceptible to falling in those unhealthy patterns.
What about a partner? What can we do to help a partner?
What we can do with a partner is we can first of all show them attunement. And attunement is not just being physically present. It's letting them know you matter, your feelings matter. So this
Right.
means accessible, responsive, engaged. You matter, your feelings matter, you're important to me. And once the partner feels that, they can feel safe enough to do their own work, and they can heal whatever it is that puts them in these loops.
Right. Fantastic. So again, if people, want to check you out, want to get your counseling advice, how do they do that?
Just go to Talk with Rebecca, and there's lots of free downloads, lots of information that's really great for you. For counseling, I'm kind of booking out quite far right now, but psychologytoday.com, or there's a little form that they can fill out on the website itself and reach me.
Thank you so much for joining us.
It was my pleasure.
So I wanted to introduce you to Rebecca Rosenblat. As I mentioned, a psychologist. She's a sex therapist. She's a couples therapist. She's a therapist for individuals as well. This is the third show that I've had the pleasure of doing with Rebecca. We did an incredibly interesting show on the different ways that men and women communicate. And she went through the 10 different ways that men and women communicate. It was really quite interesting, and I think it's kind of helpful for you to understand not only how you communicate if you're a man or a woman, but also how your partner might communicate differently. And it was really quite interesting, and it's available on my YouTube channel if you're interested. And then in addition, we talked about sex addiction, which is something that Rebecca has said is growing because of COVID-19, people stuck at home, stuck looking at videos, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was really kind of interesting, and it was thought-provoking, and so an interesting show as well. And we're going to do a couple more shows. Tonight's was obviously about attachment. So I think Rebecca's got a lot to give to society, to her community, and we really appreciate it. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Brian Crombie on The Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Good night, everybody.